Our scripture reading for this morning comes from Matthew chapter 11, verses 27 to 30. This is Jesus speaking. My Father has handed all things over to me. No one knows the Son except the Father, and nobody knows the Father except the Son, and anyone to whom the Son wants to reveal him. Come to me, all you who are struggling hard and carrying heavy loads, and I will give you rest. Put on my yoke and learn from me. I'm gentle and humble, and you will find rest for yourselves. My yoke is easy to bear, and my burden is light. The word of God for us, the people of God. Thanks be to God. So I'm curious, have any of you noticed that human beings can be really dumb sometimes? Anybody? Is it just me? Can we also all be honest that sometimes we are the ones who are being dumb? Now, I'm not trying to amplify or activate your inner critic, which we talked about last week, that toxic voice in our head that says, no, you really are dumb. Pastor Dan knows. Look, he's speaking right to you. Like I'm looking right at you, Jeremy. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying I think we can all look at human behavior, including our own, and admit that we don't always make choices that are good for us. Sometimes we intentionally make choices that are bad for us, right? We choose immediate pleasure over long-term gain. We respond to manipulative marketing based around things like manufactured desire, urgency, scarcity, and status. I know that because I have a degree in advertising. That's what they taught us to do. We allow social media posts to drive our blood pressure through the roof and to drive a wedge in our families and friendships. In the book of Romans, the Apostle Paul describes it this way: I do what I don't want to do, and I don't do what I do want to do. Now, he blames it on the power of sin and death, and I think that he's right, but I also think that it's even simpler than that sometimes. How many of you ever heard of the concept of the lizard brain? We have inside of us multiple layers of evolution inside of our brain. The core of our brain is the oldest. It's what a lot of basic, simple animals have. Thankfully, we have other layers to it, but we still have that inner lizard brain. And this refers to the structures that run things like, emotions, fight, flight, or freeze, our drive to survive and reproduce. The problem is that part of our brain is so slow to adapt. And how many of you know and even just feel in your bones that the world and culture and technology changes so much faster than our brains can keep up with, right? These parts of our brains are essentially still running on caveman operating systems. They were formed and trained during the time when, food was scarce. And so you had to eat as much as you can because you never know where your next meal will come from. It was formed in a time when we were exposed to less information in a lifetime than we encounter in one day. No wonder we feel a little overwhelmed sometimes. This part of our brain was formed at a time when you could die at any moment. So the goal was just to make decisions today to get through to tomorrow. Long-term thinking isn't natural to our lizard brain. It was formed in a time when the only people you knew and could trust were your immediate family or small group of people, your little tribe, and anyone outside of that, especially if they didn't look like you, were a threat. Anyone can see where that's still running some of the show. Now, thankfully, other parts of our brain have evolved, and so that is not fully an excuse. But the problem is, as we've talked about throughout this series, sometimes we are running on autopilot. Sometimes we are so busy or so distracted or so focused on specific things that we don't realize when our natural impulses, when the inner critics, when the bad voices, when the lizard brain is taking over and controlling our emotions and our actions. And so this voice can end up shouting inside of our heads, our hearts, or our spirits, flagging things that feel like dire needs that aren't actually needs. And sadly, we can't just blame our lizard brain, but our more advanced sections of our brain do it too. And they pull all the same levers that get pulled when we have legitimate needs. Things like hormones and chemicals in our thinking and our breathing, which is why false needs can create anxiety that feels real, because it is real. We can experience real anxiety or a sense of dread or even danger about things that if we were in a well state, if we were Hungry, tired, and lonely are like the three triggers for our worst decisions and emotional reactions. If we were in a neutral place, we would recognize and realize that they're not true needs or not true emergencies. Here's an example. Maybe you can relate to this. I have a dog and a cat, and we do not have any doors that they can get through to go outside by themselves. And there are times where I'll be like, hey, I haven't seen the dog in a while. And I'll do a quick pass through the house, and I don't see her, and what happens? Boom, like immediate, she's lost, she's out on the road, she's dead. Like, no, she's in the corner of the bathroom. You just didn't go all the way in and look. Like, she can't open a door. No human being has opened a door, and your rational brain knows that, but your emotional, anyone get like false anxiety like that? Well, Pastor Steve Cuss, who wrote the book, The Expectation Gap, has said that all humans struggle to a certain degree with the 5 big false needs. And I want to encourage you to have courage and to be brave. And as we name these, if you're willing, if you're brave, I would love for you to give some indication if this is something you have experienced or struggle with. It can be as simple as a head nod. It could be a full-on hand raise. The first service really went for it, right? But I don't want you to do that to single yourself out. I'd rather you do that to actually see that you're not alone. Now, Krista and the Statons and stuff, you guys are going to feel alone, and everyone else is going to laugh at you, but it's okay. It's okay. You can look at me because I have, honestly, all 5. So let's see how we do. Anyone have struggles with control? Any control freaks in the room? Okay, the right side. All right, hello, right side. Control freaks, right? We need to be in control at all times or most times. How many of you have ever been going into a meeting or a conversation or something, and you have run every scenario in your head ahead of time? You plan for when this person says this, I'm going to respond this way. When this person does what they always do, here's what I'm going to do. You run these scenarios. And then what happens when something happens that you didn't anticipate? Ooh, you get uncomfortable, you get defensive. You might even get aggressive. You start lashing out, right? How many of you have been part of a group trying to decide where to go to dinner? And how many of you have been a part of that situation in which part of the group that seems to be gaining momentum is trying to take you to a place that you know is bad? And so what do? You try to use your subtle or not so subtle manipulative skills to guide the group to somewhere else, and it's for their good. It's for their good. I'm using my powers for good. How many of you know that happens in groups for more important things than just dinner? We get uncomfortable when we don't have the level of control we need, and so we become reactive in order to try to regain control. We raise our voice. We get angry. We exert our influence. All right, number 2, I've already told you that I struggle with this one. Perfection. Any perfectionists in the room? Yeah. This is a big one for me. We have the need to do something right, even if it's the first time we've tried it and have no reason to be good at it. Anyone like that? And what happens when you encounter a situation and think you will not succeed? What do? You don't do it. You don't attempt things that you think you will fail at. You don't do things that you think you will be merely good at. You wait until it's something you know you will knock out of the park, right? And when we look at our life or our work performance, our relationships, the first thing we think about is not how good it's going. We think about what? How it could be better. Someone in the first service said, how bad it's going. I was like, ooh, that's tough. Like, how it could be better. How many of you fend off compliments with all the ways it could have been better? That was a good sermon. Yeah, well, that one joke didn't really work, but thank you, that was really kind. You're right, we do like ninja moves, just fending off compliments with all the ways it could be better, because we need people to know that perfection is the standard. And that's what we were shooting for. There is no such thing as good enough. And sadly, we can feel that way in our relationship with God, too. That can infect that relationship. All right, third one, knowing the answer. Anybody struggle with being a know-it-all? I didn't think that I had this one until I read this chapter and then did one of the examples in the book this week. And that is when someone asks a question of someone else and you know the answer, you answer it. The question wasn't directed at you, but you answered it because you need everyone to know that you knew the answer. And what's really sad, I told you last week that I'm an auditory person. And so when I'm in the office writing a sermon, praying, reading the Bible, all my holy stuff or whatever I'm doing, if I hear a voice in the hallway, I automatically listen to that voice. And so our preschool director was walking by, and I heard her ask a question as she was passing by my office. I got up from behind my desk, I walked out, and I chased her down to give her the answer to her question that she did not ask me. And she said, I got to be careful what I'm saying in the hallway. And I said, yes, you do. Because I'm going to hit you with all the right answers if you're not careful. People like this, we want to be seen as the people that know everything. We want to be seen as smart. We love to learn and we love to teach, but it's not because we love knowledge or want other people to learn. It's because we want people to think we're smart. Pastor Steve says he struggles with this, and one of the humorous manifestations is fighting with telemarketers. He needs to prove to them that he knows more than they do. When they call and say, I'm here calling about your extended warranty on your car, you go, okay, well, what kind of car do I have? He wants to prove to them that they don't know what they're talking about. All right, fourth one. This one's going to seem a little odd. Being there for people. That sounds like a good thing. And all of them are actually rooted in goodness, which we'll get to. But what this is referring to is needing to be there for everybody, not because we actually care about their needs, but we need to be needed. How many of you feel that or struggle with that or know so? I need to be needed. Or how about this? If others are not okay, then I cannot be okay. We tend to jump in with advice or to save the day when perhaps all someone needed was a listening ear. But surely they need our advice. I need to fix it. And so we overcommit and we neglect our own needs. And so then when we're in need, we blame all these other needy people that are just taking from us all the time. Or we blame all the other people who aren't as helpful to me as I am to them. But why are they not that helpful to you? Because you never tell them what you need. And when they ask you what you need, you don't have an answer. You say, I don't know. Or you say the code for I don't know, which is, oh, I'm fine. Number 5, approval. How many of you have the false need of approval? Any people pleasers in the building? Our anxiety soars if we think anyone doesn't like us. How many of you get stuck replaying conversations? How many of you on a drive home from a meeting replay the whole meeting and try to figure out why that person looked upset when you said this? How many of you get in conversations with them and you carry it on and you win them over in the car on the way home because you need to feel like you've won them over? It becomes your life goal to win someone over, to convince them that you're right, or you're good, or you're cool, or my intentions were right, and you took it the wrong way. We focus on the few who don't like us to the detriment of the many who do. Oftentimes, disrespect is a major trigger. We might get angry if we feel disrespected or neglected. And folks like this are prone to humble bragging, which is essentially fishing for compliments. Because outside approval, our tank needs to constantly be filled up. So we just kind of drop what we're working on or something we've achieved or something that's going well so someone can say, that's good, and pat us on the head. Now, all of these can drive moments of acute anxiety. That's that moment when you think your pet has died or disappeared. It's that moment when you're in a meeting where you say something and someone sneezes and you're like, well, they must not like me. They're allergic to my idea. Whatever, like that moment of intense anxiety, just a rush of adrenaline. We all know those anxiety moments that like hit and you're in it, in the middle of it. But the problem is these 5 false needs also generate what's known as chronic anxiety. This is that constant low-grade anxiety that's running in the background. It's that sense of a threat or danger or dread that you feel that you can't put your finger on, but you're carrying it. It runs in the background. Sometimes it's intangible. You don't know where it's coming from or what caused it, but you just don't feel right. I told you earlier in this series that when I was coming up through the ordination process, one of my growth assignments was to go be a hospital chaplain so that I could encounter a broad variety of people and experiences and be face-to-face with death and dying and suffering. Well, I'm embarrassed to tell you my other assignment was to take a break. Like I got assigned a Sabbath retreat because I was just too tightly wound. And so I went to a monastery for a week, and when I arrived, the spiritual director said, awesome, you are physically present, but I need you to become mentally, emotionally, and spiritually present. So I want you to go sit on that bench for an hour and then come see me. And so I sat down, and what was incredible was that as I was sitting there, just staring out at this field, as the minutes went by, I became more and more aware of all of the tension I was carrying. I could feel my heart rate, and it was far too high for someone who was just sitting staring at a field. I could hear this buzzing in my ears because I'm constantly listening to music or podcasts or audiobooks. I could feel like soreness in my shoulders because I was just carrying tension. Anyone relate to this? You just, like, you're sore and you're like, I did not work out. I'm not a workout person. Why am I sore? And it's because we're carrying this constant, chronic anxiety. Now, let's pause for a moment. How many of you had at least one of those things? How many had more than one? How many of you had, and this will be the last question, how many of you had 3 or more? Yeah. But let's ask a different set of questions. How many of you truly think you can be fully in control of everything? How many of us truly think we can achieve perfection across the board? How many of us believe that we can know all there is to know? How many of us believe that we can be there for absolutely everyone in our life? How many of us truly think that we can get everyone we ever meet to like us? Pastor Steve writes this, our chronic anxiety pushes us to strive for something we can never attain. These are not characteristics or qualities of human beings. We just simply aren't built for that. But I think it does describe somebody else who is in full control, who is perfect, who is the source of all knowledge and truth, who can be there for everyone, who is the source of the only approval that matters. God is. So our expectation gap this week is, I believe God is with me, but I don't feel it. And here's the one-sentence summary. If you want to tune out after this, great. But here it is. We don't experience God's presence in our lives because we are constantly trying to fill God's place in our lives with someone or something else. We try to become God-sized when we try to control everything, or we try to be perfect, or we try to know it all, or we try to be there for everyone. Or we let other people fill that space in our life when we require their approval. Pastor Steve says, really what this is a replay of the first sin. Think back to the Garden of Eden. Adam and Eve are there, and there's 2 primary trees in the center of the Garden of Eden. One is the tree of life, full access. Eat it up. Great. The other is the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And they were told not to eat from that tree. Because who was already providing the knowledge of good and evil? God was. Remember chapter 1, and it was good, and it was good, and it was good. And then when Adam was alone, God said it was not good. God is already defining what is good and what is not good, what is good and what is evil. And so by God saying, don't eat of that tree, God is saying, I need you to trust me. I know you don't know everything, but I'll provide you what you need if you will trust me. But what were the words of the tempter? Well, that seems like a waste of time. You can just be like God. Eat from that tree and you cut out the middleman. You can become like God. You can have all the knowledge. You can define what's good and evil. Why don't you just go for it? That seems a silly system to rely on some other being. And they bought it. And we do too, over and over and over again. Pastor Steve writes this, it is especially difficult to notice God when we have overreached as humans and try to do God's job for God. It is especially difficult to notice God when we have overreached and try to do God's job for God. Now, these big 5 needs, a lot of them are just twisted extremes of our gifting. God has gifted you, and God has called you. I have the title of pastor, but you all are ministers. We are all called into ministry. We all have a purpose to play in this world, but we are called to play that purpose as humans, to be human-sized. And human size can still result in excellence. It still requires deep thought and hard work and sacrificial giving, investment, right? Human size doesn't mean lazy. And it doesn't mean making excuses, but it's about being clear to answer these questions. What is God's part to carry? What is my part to carry? What is the part of others to carry? So as an example from my life, Sunday morning worship activates all 5 false needs in me. Every Sunday morning, I feel a need to be in control of your experience. I want this place to be like Disneyland. I want it to be clean. I want it to be perfect. I want everyone to feel welcome and greeted. I want to control your experience. And I want it all to be perfect. I want no missed notes. I want no jokes that fall flat. I want everything to get no technical issues. I want it all to be perfect. I was in here this morning straightening chairs because we had a grandparents event on Friday, and I didn't want you to come in and think this place was okay with wobbly rows. I want the sermon to answer every question that comes up in your mind as it's going on. I want you to leave thinking that I'm smart and that if you ever have a question, I'm the one to come to. I want this church and this worship service to meet every need you brought in with you as you came in the door. I want you to leave fully satisfied and fully unburdened by everything you brought through the door. And I want everyone to like me and to think I'm charming and funny and to think that this church is the best. And I want you to leave and immediately text 10 friends to come next Sunday. I seriously do want you to do that, but it's sometimes out of a bad motivation, right? But what is my part on Sunday morning? My part is to hire and train and resource good staff members. My part is to encourage and equip good volunteers. My job is to think through the details that we do have control over and ensure that we are controlling them. And my job is to put in the work necessary on the sermon. And I know when I've done that, and you know when I haven't. What are other people's parts? I need the staff and our volunteers to follow through on what they've been asked to do and agreed to do and trained to do. Also, the church is the people, by the way. Like, your experience here is not just based on our staff and our volunteers. But you remember the thing in the kids, the song, and then the church is the people? Like, you all influence one another's experience, whether you're here as an attender or staff or volunteer. Also, if you are here coming to experience God, I need you to be open to that. I can't control that. I can't make you listen to God. And then what is God's part? To be present and active, moving and speaking, forgiving and saving, calling and sanctifying. Those are all things that none of us can do. And now think about your life, your relationships with your spouse, your kids, your neighbors, your coworkers, your classmates. What is your part? What is God's part? And what are other people's parts? And I think today's passage really hits home at the heart of this. Jesus says, "My Father has handed over all things to me." So who's in control? Jesus is in control. No one knows the Son except the Father, and nobody knows the Father except the Son, who has all the right answers, the only knowledge that's worth anything at the end of the day. God does. No one knows the Father except the Son, and anyone to whom the Son wants to reveal him. Who cares enough about us to reveal this love and knowledge and grace? God does. There's 3 of our big 5 needs right there. And who is this available to? Jesus says, "Come to me, all you." Come to me, all. It's open to everybody. Come to me, all you who are struggling hard and carrying heavy loads, and I will give you rest. Put on my yoke and learn from me. I'm gentle and humble, and you will find rest for yourselves. My yoke is easy to bear, and my burden is light. The love and approval and acceptance and forgiveness of the only one that matters is available to us. Because the truth is, we're all struggling hard. Some of our struggles on paper might not look as bad as anybody else, but it's still a struggle. Any one of those 5 false needs is a struggle. And then all of us are struggling with the grip that sin and death has on our life. It's just part of the world we live in. But if we turn over our lives and the way that we live them to Jesus and put on his yoke, which is an expression that simply means following his teaching and commands, it says we will find rest. When we follow the voice of the fake narrator in our head that says you need to be perfect, does that result in rest? No. When you follow the voice inside your head that says you have to have all the right answers or you're stupid, does that lead to rest? When you follow the voice that says you have to be approved by everyone you run into, does that lead to rest? No. Stop trying to be God-sized. Be human-sized, exactly as God intended. Because when we become human-sized, then we leave the space that God wants to fill with God. We leave the space for God to be present in our lives, chasing control, pursuing perfection, needing to know it all, bearing everyone's burdens, addiction to approval. These all lead to anxiety, but the way of Jesus leads to rest. Now, there is still a burden to bear. We are saved from sin so that we can fulfill the purpose for which we were made. We don't accept the love and grace and mercy of God so that we can just hang out. Pastor Steve says that he's worked with so many ministries and nonprofits doing the most difficult work around the world. Human trafficking, lack of access to clean water and food, domestic abuse, protecting Christians in places of the world where it's dangerous. Working with those, that's very hard work. But they are going to struggle if they don't know where their part ends and God's part begins. Now, what I'm concerned about is this sounds a little bit like that old Bob Newhart sketch where he's playing a doctor and a guy says, "It hurts when I do this," and his response is, "Well, then stop it. It hurts when I do this, well, then don't do that." I'm worried that what you're hearing so far is just don't do that. Don't try to be in control. Well, just stop it. The problem is if it were that easy, we would have done it by now. And so how do we do it? Pastor Steve chooses to do it by remembering these two lines. God with me, God ahead of me. God with me, God ahead of me. You can say that. You can pray it. It makes for a great breath prayer. That's a practice where as you breathe in, you think of one line. As you breathe out, you think of another. God with me, God ahead of me. You can write it on the top of the meeting agenda that you're concerned about. You can write it on your mirror. You can put it on a sticky note. You can put it in your calendar. You got an appointment coming up you're anxious about? Title it, God with me, God ahead of me, meeting with Jeremy. Just picking on you. I'm never anxious about meeting with you. You're great. If God is with me, then I can always look for God's presence and activity. I can look for where I'm over-functioning and work to take a step back to allow God to fill that space. And if God is not only with me, but God is ahead of me, then whatever I'm going into may be new for me, but it's not new for God. God is not figuring it out as he goes along. It also means that I'm not bearing the pressure of bringing God into a situation where God is not already there. How many of you ever felt that pressure? Well, I got to go in and I've got to be the Christian. I've got to be the one that brings God into this workplace or brings God into this meeting where these people, God is already there. We go in and we look for where God is already moving because it's happening. If the one who is in control is already there, then we don't need you to be in control. If the one who is perfect is already there, then the situation doesn't need any more perfection. If the one who is the source of all knowledge and truth is already there, there is nothing you can add from your wisdom and intelligence, but instead you can ask God to reveal what you need just for that moment. If the one who can be there for everybody is already there, then we join in that care. We don't bear that burden ourselves. And if the source of the only approval that matters is with you and ahead of you, you don't need the approval of anyone